Thank you very much, Lou. I can't follow Tim. Tim has this afternoon for the kind of leadership and inspiration that he gives all of us. And for me, being his neighbor and his colleague, I started my teaching at Pepperdine in the early 80s, even before Tim was there. And it's made a great, great difference in my life, to me as well. I have quite a bit that I'd like to share with you, but as we know as mediators, no matter how crowded the agenda, we always have to make time for the people and to be able to take just a few moments. I want you to meet my student, a future peacemaker, John Fisher. He and his colleagues mediate civil harassment cases in the LA Superior Court and make us all proud. And they will be the next generation following the steps of Lou and Tim and all of the other people in this room. I also saw my twin sister here, Avis. There she is. You may think I'm kidding, but we've taken the psychological tests, and we look very similar, and we have all of the wiring exactly on the same synapses. So, Avis, it was wonderful to see you again, and your dialogue that after the riots that helped calm the waters in Los Angeles will never, ever be forgotten, those public conversations. And in addition to all of the other international people who are here, I'd just like to mention a couple. One happens to be a very close friend from Scotland who just finished his dissertation on conflicts between mediators. And you and Malcolm, could you please stand? And just before I got up here, I'm always open for beautiful presents. And last night I had a wonderful dinner with some of our friends and colleagues from Buenos Aires in my 10-year-old Spanish, trying to keep up with Professor Wright. I'm sure I slowed the conversation down. But just before I got up here, Professor Maria Alba Aliero de Almeida gave me a copy of her book, which is very relevant to what I want to talk about. La Paz, Camino para el Cambio Social. Peace, the road for social change. Thank you for sharing it with us. I grew up in this field as an active member of the Academy of Family Mediation. And since its formation, ACR has felt like my home. I was delighted to be at ACR's first conference in Toronto, and then in San Diego in 2002. And in its third year, I sat in the audience where one of our greatest peacemakers of our generation, Senator George Mitchell, was the keynote speaker. How many of you were in Orlando with me? Look at that. Coming back year after year and giving to your communities. Well, I've never forgotten what Senator Mitchell said. After a lifetime of public service, including being Senate Majority Leader, Senator Mitchell successfully mediated the Northern Irish Peace Accord. He kept us at ACR riveted with his stories and his lessons, and two of which I've repeated since that day. The first is that persistence may be the mediator's greatest key personal attribute. He called it his 500 days of failure and one day of success. His second lesson was that always, always listen to anyone who wants to speak. He told us a story of long, damp days in Belfast, far away from his family and friends in Maine, during which he would sit with the fringest of fringe players, of fringe groups, who bent his ear long after closing time at the pubs. However, when he was ready to stitch together an agreement, those fringe players who had received Senator Mitchell's respect of being heard without judgment and without limit were prepared to support Senator Mitchell in a compromise agreement. And since its signing in 2000, the peace has mostly held, and hundreds of years of murdering young Catholic and Protestant people have virtually come to an end. And neighborhoods of Belfast are quiet, with the troubles receding into a more distant, yet still unpleasant memory. So what does a public mediator, a great person such as George Mitchell, teach us about translating our work that we do day by day into peacemaking? I'd like to use some of my own personal journey as a segue to answer this question. I opened my office in 1979, yeah, that's me, in a storefront between a pet store and a beauty salon within walking distance of LA Airport. I received as many calls for medication and meditation as I did for mediation. And my other pioneer mediator colleagues dreamed of the day when mediation would be as well known and used by the public as the courthouse. We dreamed that mediation would be in every corner of our society and would model an interdisciplinary and consumer-oriented approach. It was an ambitious dream, but we were also taken by mediation's magic, that we thought that in 30 years our dream would be a reality. And looking at this conference, I think we're well on our way. Because here at ACR, we all have the chance to learn skills from the world's best trainers and to network with leaders from the field who can not only model their success, but also can maybe refer us a little business and provide some career opportunities. Lots of organizations offer skills and networking. But one thing that sets ACR apart is its commitment to peacemaking. Let's take a look at what some of the people in this room have had as far as their impact in the field. I'd like just a show of hands around the room. How many of you practice conflict resolution in a governmental agency? Look at that. How many of you practice conflict resolution in a private company changing industry? A few, but we'll get more next year. How many of you, that's a mediator, right? We're always looking for the positive. How many of you practice conflict resolution in a community mediation or nonprofit setting? Making it possible for people of low and modest means to get help. How many of you practice conflict resolution as a judge or a member of a court staff? Well, we got some work to do there. How many of you practice conflict resolution as a teacher or educator, working on the next generation? How many of you practice conflict resolution as a licensed member of a helping profession, such as a therapist, lawyer, or accountant? Interesting, they aren't all lawyers as some of them think. We have so much in this organization that can teach the legal profession. And finally, how many of you practice as a private mediator, systems designer, or private consultants? Running your own little business, having to eat, what you bring in. I have a question for all of you. How many of you call yourselves peacemakers and dedicate yourself to peacemaking work? Actually, use the word peacemaker. Because I go to places all over the world and they say, well, no, I'm a mediator. I'm not a peacemaker. Well, my real question today is, how does peacemaking find its way into mediation, and what difference does it make if it does? First, let's take a look at what peacemaking is and how it might differ from mediation. Mediation is a process. Peacemaking is a set of values, personal attributes, goals, behaviors. Tim is a peacemaker. Some of us are mediators. Many mediators are peacemakers, and many are not. Many peacemakers have different roles, even though you start as mediation. You may not even be a neutral. Who said you lose your peacemaking card for working with one side of a conflict to help them negotiate and see clarity a little better? Peacemakers are also litigators, members of the military, prisoners, gang members, and other roles. So let's look at some of the various models of mediation and look closely and see which one wins the Peacemaker Award and meets the Peacemaker Impact Test. Is a mediator who uses a transformative approach more of a peacemaker than someone who is directive and evaluative? Is someone who works with lower income and diverse ethnic populations more of a peacemaker than someone who practices in a high end of town with mediating rich corporate executives? Is someone who works with individuals in the private sector more of a peacemaker than a staff person in a governmental agency or mediation center? Is someone who resolves day-to-day problems more of a peacemaker than someone who designs dispute resolution systems or tackles large policy issues? Is someone who works as a neutral more of a peacemaker than someone who coaches, represents, or advocates, and is a resource to one side of the conflict? I would suggest that it is not the type of work that you do. It's not the population that you serve, or the area of concentration that determines whether you are a peacemaker. It is our commitment to improve ourselves, those we touch, and to use our work to make a difference in ourselves, our clients, and our communities. So I want us today to explore 3 questions. The first, do we create a sense of peace and mindfulness within our own lives and in our work by harnessing our core values and best personal attributes? Number 2, are we devoted to the improvement and healing of parties' individual lives and organizations and the repair of their relationships and the prevention of future conflict? And number 3, in addition to the people that we touch personally, have we made a commitment to use our skills, like MBB, to impact the people and institutions with whom we work in our wider professional communities and beyond? First, let's take a look at our personal peace and mindfulness. One of our field's greatest thinkers is Professor Leonard Riskin. Over 25 years ago, Len wrote a book about ADR and lawyers. Then, if you recall, he created his famous grid, the Riskin grid. He even went beyond it when several years later he was criticized for making his grid too rigid, and he did a new grid, apologized to the field, and said, I can do better. We are constantly learning from each other. Then, in 2009, he and Nancy Welch wrote an incredible article in the Dickinson Law Review called, "Is That All There Is?" And they looked at court mediation, and he found that it was lawyerized. The mediators were lawyers. The lawyers were lawyers. The people who had conflicts were deferring to the lawyers. And he said that people in trouble did not have a voice in their own lives. And when they did, it was limited by the professionals who were there. And of course, I left the rest of my notes in my bag.